Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. As many of you have joined from different countries and different time zones, we welcome to KHA Homeopathy Study Group Pro Bono webinar hosted by Kavita Holistic Approach. Before we start, we would thank Universe for giving us this great opportunity with Gayatri Mantra chanted by Professor Regina from Brazil. I would like to take the privilege to say that our KHA Homeopathy Study Group is very unique homeopathy pro bono study group from the United States of America, which formed to unite world-renowned practitioners throughout the globe. KHA's mission and vision are very unique to inspire young homeopaths, mentor, provide excellency for educational purposes using holistic approaches via webinars, which provide professional continuing educational homeopathic credits for practitioners, which follow the principles of classical homeopathy, and we invite speakers for HNI-accredited webinars. We value and treasure the human collective as our honorable peers. We provide merit certificate for spreading the light of homeopathy worldwide, while celebrating stage 4 cancer survivors through our inspirational book talks. These webinars are for educational purposes only and see expert homeopath for treatment. This is Kavita Kokunur, board certified homeopath from Michigan, USA, president and CEO of Kavita Holistic Approach, founder and director of Homeopathy Study Group. I am outreach coordinator of CHC PR committee, encouraging homeopaths to become CHC certified. I am member of Kevin Friendly Foundation, a non-profit organization that helps to serve poor people in greater needs in India. Verma and Professor Regina, would you like to chant Gayatri Mantra, please?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you for the opportunity. Om Bhuvat Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyan Bargo Devasya Dhimahi Jiyo Yona Prachodaya. Many blessings to the universe. Namaskarams.
Thank you, Professor.
Namaskaram.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar from different countries and different time zones. I thank KHA Homeopathy Study Group entire team for the continuous support from bottom of my heart. This webinar is moderated by KHA family, Professor Regina Rianelli, KHA Chief Administrator Dr. Sweta Singh, Dr. Nupursha, and Dr. Sweta Verma. Today's webinar is moderated. It is being recorded as we speak and we are live on Facebook. We will post jot form in Zoom webinar chat at the end of the webinar. Please fill the form to receive the certificate of CU. If you are watching live on Facebook, email us at kstudygroup@gmail.com. Today, February 21st, we have very special guest speaker, Kate Birch, sharing her knowledge about CV Nososde research and updates. At the end, we have California Homeopathic Medical Society President Kathleen Schiebel, who speaks about CHMS. Intent of this webinar is for educational purposes only. How one can boost the immune system through safe and natural methods using homeoprophylaxis. Kate Birch is an experienced homeopath from Minnesota. Kate has been registered in the North American Society of Homeopaths since 1996 and is certified in classical homeopathy, CCH, by the Council for Homeopathic Certification. She is the past vice president of NASH and remains the North American liaison to the International Council of Homeopathy. She has a busy family practice and lectures locally and internationally on homeopathy for infectious disease, children's health and vaccine damage. In 2008, Kate Birch, one of the founding directors of Free and Healthy Children International, met Dr. Isaac Golden and was impressed by the efficacy, rates, and ease of administration of his homeoprophylaxis program and brought it back to the United States. Homeoprophylaxis has been a part of the practice of homeopathy for the last 200 years. However, it was not developed as a form of public health model for infectious disease until 1985, when Dr. Isaac Golden established a program under his research model in Australia. Kate Birch has done extensive CV Nososde research. An entire FSCI team has done incredible job with the CV Nososde research. And I'm glad to be part of this research program. It is a real-time, real incidences, real application of homeoprophylaxis in epidemic. Myself being a HP certified supervisor under umbrella of FSCI, and I serve FSCI along with HPWWC board in 2019. Kate has written several books on homeoprophylaxis, and they are available on Amazon too. And her recent book, Glyphosate Toxicity, which received great response and appreciation. Thank you so much, Kate, for all the great work you are doing. And to learn more about the great work of FSCI, visit freeandhealthychildren.org. Let us welcome Kate to our webinar. And at the end of the webinar, thank you, Kate. And at the end of the webinar, we welcome very special guest, Kathleen Shevel. So stay tuned until the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for your precious time and undivided attention. Let us welcome our first honorable speaker, Kate Birch, to our webinar.
Thank you, Kavita. Hi. So am I able to share my screen? Should be, yes. Okay, here. Beautiful. All right. Well, I'm so grateful for everybody being in attendance today to listen to this presentation. There's going to be various stops through the presentation that we can take questions, and you're welcome to put them in the chat box. And then during those times, maybe Kavita, you can read them. So what it is that we're going to be looking at today is an overview of our research methodology, research results, and clinical indications for coronavirus nososde, and the application of homeoprophylaxis in epidemics. So if you haven't had a chance to view these 3 videos, they are available on the FHCI website, freeandhealthychildren.org, on the right-hand side under the archives. And these videos are really formal presentations of the not yet published research, but we felt an urgency to release these. They were all released in the first weeks of January. So part 1 video is an introduction looking at who registered and the concepts behind the research. Part 2 is looking at the dosing dates, active cases upon registration, and remedy responses. Part 2 actually begins to reveal what would be considered a homeopathic proving of the remedy, as well as, like Kavita said, its real-time application in active cases and or previous cases, and or if we actually present the disease, and then, prevent the disease. And then part 3 is looking at the cohorts of exposure, contraction, and then long-term health outcomes. And each one of these videos, like I said, is available on the website. So what I want to start with is orientation to the work. So as Kavita said, I met Isaac Golden in 2008, and that was in Cuba. And this is was the first large-scale homeoprophylaxis intervention that the world really became aware of. And they used the Nososde NosoLep. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this because what I learned from there has really influenced the last, well, since 2008, so 12 years of the work that I've been doing with homeoprophylaxis. So there were 3 provinces, Las Tunas, Hogan, and Gamay provinces, where the intervention was applied. And then the control, if you can say, in a research design was the whole rest of the island. And so this table here shows the black line is in the provinces, the annual incidence of leptospirosis where the intervention was given. And then the green line is the rest of the island. And also then this black dotted line. So they had been studying leptospirosis for a number of years, and every year it was coming during the hurricane seasons. The hurricanes all travel from the east to the west across Cuba. It's right in the middle of pretty much every hurricane pathway in the Caribbean. And when there's the flooding, leptospirosis is a passed from animals in their urine into the floodwaters. And if a human has a scratch or a wound, then the spirochete is able to enter in and then cause kind of a pretty fatal disease. So in 2007, there were 2 major hurricanes headed towards the islands. And as a preventative, they decided they had been using a vaccine, Vaxpiral, for leptospirosis for about 20 years. And despite the vaccine, the incidences were increasing. And so based on, particularly in those provinces, because that's where the majority of the floods were happening, they had a predicted incidence in 2007, to be way up here at the top of the peak. But they managed to get the first dosing of the intervention, which was a 200C, and into those provinces, into 2.3 million people. And then the subsequent year, there was also 2 or 3 other hurricanes that came. And you can see that the rest of the island had an increase in incidence, but in the existing provinces where they had done the treatment and then they did a 10M in 2008, there was virtually, I think there were 3 or 4 suspected cases in all. So it was amazing. So then in 2013, I met I met Gustavo Bracco again in Barcelona as he presented the long-term results. They had been studying it since 2008 to 2013. And initially, what we can see is there was a decrease in incidence in the treated provinces with a simultaneous increase in incidence in the surrounding areas. But in 2013, and I'm sorry I don't have the numbers there was a decrease in incidence in all areas. So this is one side of the thinking I had is, what happens when you apply a nosode in one region of people, and what is the effect on the rest of the world or population? The other is that I was totally amazed by the coordination of the government, from the research institute to the Ministry of Health to the clinics to the farmers with their cups of sugar that were anointed with the remedies, and looking at this infrastructure that was needed to apply homeoprophylaxis on such a large scale. And so these 2 veins we're going to follow a little bit as we go through this presentation here. So when you have a group of people doing the same thing, this could be the same as an epidemic. There's a group of people that are all affected to the same susceptibility. When we do a proving, you have a group of people and they're behaving as if this one person. So all of the symptoms come together. Our materia medica is, not every person has every symptom, but collectively it's an as if one person, and different people have different spikes in that. And then we also have collective thought patterns. So what are these thought patterns, and what are they doing to our health and disease and how we're living on the planet? So with epidemic disease, we have 2 options in homeopathy, the genus epidemicus or disease nosode as an application. And provings, Jeremy Scher introduced the concept that proving provides an opportunity for a posidemic. So it gives, brings to consciousness, I guess, the positive sides, or casting the light on the darker sides of whatever's going on. And then in reference to collective thought patterns, we want to look, for instance, like when the whole world read Harry Potter, there was a palpable shift that somehow people started to believe in magic, or, you know, had a sort of a different experience about life with that. And so currently we have a media campaign, which is heavily on the fear trail. And this has become a collective thought pattern throughout the world, or particularly in the countries where that media is heavy. And then we have faith, and that's different than religiosity, which can become a fixed dogma, which is also a collective thought pattern. And if it's not a healthy orientation, then it can do that. So looking then at classical homeopathy, this is our orientation. We also understand that the liberation of chronic disease is through acute disease. And this asks a question then, is what is this acute disease process of coronavirus affording us if it's a liberation of chronic disease? And what is that chronic disease that we are suffering under? In the system of homeopathy, we treat constitutionally and acutely as these conditions arise. We treat the individual for acute and chronic care. Then when we have an epidemic, the shift changes. We have the two options, genus epidemicus and homoprophylaxis. The limitation of genus epidemicus is it requires time and individuation, and it's on a large scale, it's not possible to do that. It also requires an extensive pharmacy and access to the remedies. And, you know, are there pharmacies on every street corner? And what is the infrastructure needed in order to determine the remedy for that person, and so on and so forth. Whereas the homoprophylaxis option is a single nosode that is easily passed to everybody with the same dosing instructions. And then you can treat and individualize based on what's going on with that person. So these are some questions that we hope to answer with the research, and I'm just putting it forth here. So again, what kind of infrastructure is needed to deliver HP? How does the immune system respond to disease? And this is very important because in all of the conventional point of view, nothing is about supporting the immune system or what is that immune system doing. And this is key to actually understanding how we're going to survive as humanity. Then in the research, we're looking at what are the toxicological effects of coronavirus. So that is the disease or pathogenesis. What's the proving and what are the cured symptoms, proving and cured symptoms. So that gets put into the materia medica. And then this is a more ethereal question, and do we know the answer, but how do nosodes work in the collective? And I can just say that our research team, as we work through 6 months of tabulating data from, you know, close to 800 people who took the remedy and, you know, thousands of symptoms, we certainly were transformed. We hope that humanity was. So let's just look at this model that we want to, I mean, currently our existing vaccine paradigm model has all these in place, and part of what my goal has been with the creation of Free and Healthy Children and the application of Free and Healthy Children is to look at how we are all working together. So we have the individual, let's say the individual practitioner that's interfacing with the consumer, and that's the interpersonal relationship that's there. And then we have sort of an organizational level, like how do these practitioners come together? How do we deliver a unified system? And then who is the community that's going to access this? So there is a larging there is an increasing number of people that are looking for something different. And part of the reason why we are where we are with the current paradigm is that the community and the cultural values and norms of that community are in cohesion with that paradigm. And public policy then has, is either forcing that directive or ultimately, however, if we want to address the ills that are at every level, from the individual to the interpersonal relationships, organization, community, public policy should arise out of the needs of the individual, as opposed to an agenda that actually doesn't interface with that. And so I can just say what we've done with Free and Healthy Children is started with our childhood program. So, but what are the needs of the child needing to have an immunological developmental process stimulated by an infectious disease, nososde, and then how do we apply that? And are our practitioners trained enough, sufficient enough knowledge to be able to interface with these? How do we get the remedies? How do we put it in, what's called our program, our status sheet? And then how does that interface with the culture? Parents have been giving their homeoprophylaxis sheet to daycare providers, and some schools are signing off on it. But what shifts right now, or what shifts need to happen on the larger scale in order for, like Montana, there was a bill that was just introduced. So this is at the level of public policy, offering that if you do proof of immunization or previous exposure, contraction of the disease, proof of homeoprophylaxis or other immunomodulating therapy, that then it could be public policy, then it could be allowed. And these are the things that we're calling on, and I'm calling on each of you to think about these, how you might be able to access homeoprophylaxis. So with Free and Healthy Children, we have a family membership platform, and we have our basic program. And in 2020, we completed the research that started in 2008 of the childhood HP program. And 2020, we did our coronavirus research, and that's because we had the infrastructure set up. We had a set of consumers in our family membership platform that was eager to take the nososde, and the pharmacies had the nosodes, and so we, in a 2-week time, were able to put together our entire research platform last March. And then just open-ended questions. What is the future for homeopathy? So now we're going to look at the kinds of research that's out there. So we have an option of a direct control study. That's where you hold extraneous factors consistent so that their effects are not confounded with those of the experimental conditions. And in a real-time, real incidence application, there are so many extraneous factors that it's not possible to do a direct control study. Placebo control or single blind or double blind, that is not what we were able to do. So there's a translational study, which is a process of applying knowledge in clinical trials to address the medical needs. It's designed to improve health outcomes. And we can say that our homeoprophylaxis childhood study was a translational study, in that it was observed that children who went through the entire homeoprophylaxis program were healthier across the board compared to the general public. And there was no placebo was given. It was a real-time application in many different families with different health needs and so on and so forth. But when we put the numbers together, we could see that effect. Then you have a fixed cohort study. So this is where we set a point in time and looking at incidences, and then we look at who's exposed and unexposed. And these cohorts can be identified retrospectively or prospectively. The status needs to be established at least twice. So in our intake papers, we ask questions as, did you have the disease? Do you have active disease? And then from those, we were able to identify who was exposed to those. And then we wanted to look at, what the long-term effects are. So we did ambidirectional, I guess, because we were looking at what happened to those people who had already been sick after taking the Nososde. And we looked at what happened to those people who showed signs and symptoms upon registration, and then who was exposed to those, and then also people who just took the remedy and had no exposure, no previous disease, no active disease, but what symptoms came forth in that, and that's the part that we're calling our proving. So with our provings, you have various different options of doing that. We have a placebo-controlled, single or double blind, means that the people administrating the proving don't know what remedy was given, sometimes not blind, and sometimes they have placebo. So in our, sorry, the animation didn't come through properly, but in our study, it was partly a cohort study, partly proving and part translational. So i.e., what were the long-term health outcomes, and is there a deleterious effect or an overall improvement in health? And we had an inclusion-exclusion to look at people's existing health conditions, and also because there was a lot of uncertainty, we had some fear, and what are the risks, and we saw the cases that were happening with previous health conditions. Would we enter them into the research? And just fortunately, most of the family members who were existing with homeoprophylaxis with free and healthy children were previously healthy, previously unvaccinated, and had already a community mindset towards wanting health. And they also completely understood homeoprophylaxis, or enough to be willing to participate in it. And in the registration, some of it included the extended family, and they didn't have as much understanding about homeoprophylaxis. And, we didn't study all of the different factors that we could have. There was no placebo given and no blinding. Everybody knew that they were getting the Nososde because it's unethical to give nothing in an epidemic, and no blinding. So, sorry, these are the cohorts. And then this is the proving. So what active symptoms were there? The active symptoms actually gave us the clinical materia medica upon which to prescribe the remedy, and also to evaluate when people had symptoms, if they were a part of the clinical picture or if they were just random and unique to that person. And then what is the final outcome? Did they get the disease and tested in results? That's the translational part. So before entering into looking at the research, there are still some questions to ask about what is coronavirus, and I'm not exactly sure that we know the answers. COVID-19 seems to be the disease expression, and NovaCV1M was the potency that was used in the research. So we do know it's a complex RNA strand. There's been some evidence that this complex RNA strand looks like an exosome, which is a release of the cell of non-functional genetic material. So is coronavirus an auto process? Means it's just a process of the individual. Also, there's some relevance research saying that if you have a Protobella bacteria or streptococcal overgrowth, these increase pneumonia and blood clotting respectively. And those are some of the main conditions in the deleterious effect of COVID-19 disease expression. And then back in 4/8/2020, there were 3,000 genetic variants already identified. People have questions these days, oh, well, now there's a South African mutant and there's a UK mutant, and they've only like just targeted these two, whereas back in April, they had already identified 3,000 genetic variants. And so this adds more to the question, well, if it's a virus, wouldn't that be a stable, one-time, uniform thing? Was it just cellular breakdown because there's a collapse in many people's immune systems to all the other factors of previous vaccination, immunosuppressive drugs, glyphosate toxicity, which suppresses the immune system, 5G amplification, and so on and so forth? And then ultimately is whatever this disease process is, what is that asking for the evolution of humanity? How are humans evolving right now? And most of us are aware that if we continue living in this way, we will no longer survive based on the poisoning of our food, the poisoning of our children, genetic modification of now with the new vaccine coming, or it's already here. So these are much larger questions that actually ultimately each one of us needs to ask this question for ourselves. And let's see, I can just offer that while going through the proving symptoms, the research team there was a massive evolution that happened in each one of us. And as we picked apart all these different factors. So there's COVID-19 disease expression. There's a lot of fear and anxiety about survival. Main symptoms were runny nose, sore throat, cough, difficulty breathing, lung filtrate, so the lungs fill up with fluid, lack of oxygen is there. There can be a bleeding from multiple organ systems and system failure, and the death can be there, and ultimately it's coming from the weak link in that person. So we do have a physical body that does need to interface with this environment, and if there's cumulative issues, the survivability is not guaranteed. So Novus CV1M was sourced from China in January from the nasopharyngeal discharge and active immune processes of 13 different individuals with active COVID-19 disease. The RNA was confirmed, and also in the nosode, and this is something important to think about, are the cytokines, interleukins, and lymphokines of the person interfacing with that strand of RNA, whether it's their own exosome process or an infectious contagious process. It's yet to be determined. But if you think of a nosode as an information packet, not only does it have the RNA, but it also has information about the immune system, how to respond to that RNA. And it was verified and potentized according to HPUS standards. I had just come back from India in January of 2020 and had an opportunity to visit the Central Council of Homeopathic Research in Delhi and brought up the questions about potency in research. And they had showed me some research from the dengue nosode, and dengue was shown, nosode was shown to produce the hemorrhagic condition in cells at potencies under 200 C. And for that reason, we decided to go with the 1M potency, just because there were so many risks showing with the pathogenesis of the disease. At that point, deaths were starting to pick up in New York City and so on and so forth. So we went with the 1M, and other homeopaths had also reported that 30C and 200C, they were trying to be cautious by giving a low potency, but there was too much of an aggravation, and I have some ideas on that, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So let's also remember what a healthy immune response looks like. We have exposure. There's a prodromal period that capitulates the chill, that capitulates the fever, that capitulates antibody production, and some kind of discharge, eruption, and resolution of immunity through a sweat. And every true infectious disease needs to go through this circular process. And when you're treating acutes, usually what we look for is where in the process is that individual stuck? Are they stuck at the chill? Is the fever too high or insufficient? Are they stuck at the drowning and the discharge? And then whatever remedy that you're giving is helping to keep moving through that circle. And one of the things that homeopaths noticed is starting in late October, November of 2019 is that we were seeing people that we start treating them and they would go through one process of disease, and then it was like it would change to another process of disease and another process of disease. And retrospectively, we determined that actually coronavirus was alive and well in North America. And because of the different spikes on the virus itself, each spike is asking to pull forth, you know, was it diarrhea and vomiting? Was it chill and sweat? Was it cough and breathing? All these different things. And so this we're also keeping in mind for how did people move through when you're giving a nosode in approving. 90% of the symptoms that are going to be activated are immunological symptoms because it's a disease and it's going to activate the immune system. So when we were tracking our people as they developed symptoms, we looked to see where they were on this process. Yes. So then if you look at diseases moving through a population, typically there's a bell curve. This is the prodrome is here. The chill is coming here. The fever is really the fervent peak of the epidemic. And then at some point there's a shift that happens. And whether it's a socioeconomic, cultural, or behavioral shift that happens, then immunity starts to develop in the rest of the population as society transforms. What we're doing with a posidemic, or taking the nosode, is we are infiltrating a number of people to preemptively move them through this immune process. And because we're using higher potencies, the inverse is there, is that rather it being a suffering process, it's a liberating process. And, you know, this is a large question, but to what effect have we affected the curve? We won't know the answer, but we can think about that. An acute disease process, that of a fever, is a short-lived manifestation of the struggle between the ego and the forces of heredity or reality. And what we can say is that after the triple dose, I'll get to dosing pattern in just a minute, and notice this question mark box here. So if you have any questions so far, please put them in the chat and then we'll carry on. But so what does that mean? The ego and the forces of heredity or reality. So heredity are those weak parts of the individual that this acute process, that struggle is, does that heredity have the bandwidth to manage that acute immunological process towards survival? And if not, then that will take the person out. And then reality is, are we living? So we've been given the opportunity to live according to free will. And the question is are we living in accordance with nature or not? And humans have a number of core delusions and fixed points of view and really incorrect assumptions about how it is that we're living on the planet. And our vulnerability and our tenderness and our susceptibility is exposed in acute process where you're lying in bed with a fever and a sweat and a chill and the anxiety about your own survivability. This is a perfect time to reflect upon that reality, how to do that. So let me just stop and ask Kavita, are there any questions so far? Anybody?
I think, Kate, everyone is enjoying thoroughly. So,
Okay.
Dr. Sweta, Varma, and Nupusha, do you have anything quickly on Facebook or a chat, something which you would like to take 1 or 2 questions, please? Or we can keep it at the end.
It's okay. We'll just keep going. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
So, our research was to determine the safety, effects, and efficacy of Nososde V1M in humans for coronavirus disease, prevention, and treatment. This is the structure of how people registered. So somebody said, yes, I want to be a part. We had a newsletter sent out. We had 1,200 members. We're now at about 1,700 members from doing the research. So a number of our families joined, and then we related there were more than that. So they contacted the HP supervisor. The supervisor sent an email with information about how they could enroll. They became a family member. They completed an online consent to participate in health inventory. That's where what we were calling our initial intake. They received the remedy and took it according to dosing instructions I'll get to in a minute. They were to take note of responses, and this was to be entered into our 2-week follow-up form. And they were instructed to contact the HP supervisor if needed. So what if there were immune responses that needed to be mitigated, you know, what to do with whatever, if they forgot a dose, something like that. So there was that 2-week follow-up, and then we had a 3-month follow-up that was, you know, did they contract the disease? What are the long-term health outcomes? And what's their overall feeling throughout the process? So these are our numbers. We had 1,169 total registrants. That was from 348 families. And of these, 846 responded. So there were a number, 803 completed the 2-week follow-up, and 456 did the 3-month follow-up, and there were some who completed the 3 months that did not complete the 2-week, and some, well, many who completed the 2-week who did not complete the 3-month follow-up. There's percentages. There's so there was 323 people that did not give us any sort of response, and then based on the number of people that did not take the remedy from the 3-month follow-up, we calculated that potentially, based on that same percentage rate, that 56 people did not take the remedy who registered. That was just an estimate. We don't know, there may have been more. There's some entire families that did not respond, so 72 families. Making 323. So usually if there was one person from a family, we could, you know, we did get let's see, 45% of the families responded. So 50% with the 3 months, whereas 72 here. So that's a little bit about research anyways, is the number of people responding. And then I'm not going into all the data, but just a little key things because we want you to watch those videos. So these are our age groups. And like I said, our family membership was based on families who had done the childhood immunization program. So here we have the parents between 30 and 49, these two age groups, and then their young children. And some of them had teenagers, so the teenagers may or may not have done the childhood program. There were 10 pregnant women who entered in. And then, of course, we have the elderly ranges. So these are the in-laws, the grandparents, and so on and so forth. So this was in the intake, and these are the follow-ups. So half of the pregnant women we did get responses from, and 5 of the 12 80 plus we did get responses from. And then the 3 months, again, it's a similar, usually it's the core parents and the young children. They're the ones that are very diligently responding back with the 3 months, but basically the age groups are the same. And what I can just say is the remedy is safe for all age groups, for pregnant women, for elderly people, and despite medication. So more details of that are in the research. So people, some of these people also had long-term health conditions, the elderly people, and there was no change in these conditions. So this is all attesting to the safety of the nosode, okay? So this is the instructions. We're given a label with the remedy, a single dose, 3 pellets. Again, see the question box there. If people have questions, please put them in the chat box. The single dose was 3 pellets under the tongue to dissolve. Dosing day was on Saturday. Week 1 was a single dose. Week 2, the following Saturday, was 3 doses, morning, noon, and night. And then if there was definite exposure, to repeat the remedy again. And we advised high doses of vitamin C and garlic. Retrospectively, I could say that we should have done the 10 dose 2 weeks later, but we didn't do that. We did send out emails to people saying to take more doses, and parents and supervisors in relationship, in direct conversation with the participants, made those suggestions or repeated the, say to repeat the 1M potency. The 2-week follow-up only has the first and second dosing, so the single and triple doses. But then when we got to the 3-month follow-up, we saw that many people took many more doses, which is fine. And I'm also saying that we should have done it that way because after the close of the research in time, some of the people who had not contracted the disease in the first 3 months did contract it later. So I'm wondering if more doses would have prevented that. I don't know the answer there. So just interrupt me if there are questions, otherwise I'm going to keep going. So this is direct from the CDC website. In order of prevalence: fever or chills, cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, fatigue, muscle or body aches, headache, loss of taste or smell, and a sore throat. And interestingly, this loss of taste or smell did not really start happening on the collective until April or May. So our research was underway. One of the things is, when you design research, and we did it very quickly in a 2-week period, what questions do you ask? And so we had not asked questions about that. Some people offered that. Congestion or runny nose, and nausea or vomiting and diarrhea. It was not known to us at that time that nausea and vomiting and diarrhea were actual symptoms of coronavirus. So we didn't ask that at the outset of active immunological immune system symptoms. Some people had offered that, but it was in the follow-up questions. So anyways, we did the best that we can. So this is a tabulation of active acute symptoms upon registration. There were 63 people with suspected COVID or cold-like symptoms upon registration. And these 63 people had a total of, well, there were 26 that had fever, 33 had lung, 43 cough, 19 had body aches. Headache is also a major symptom. Many had sinus conditions. The throat, we also neglected to ask on our initial intake. So this was just if they said it later, or if it was in the additional comments, or came forward. So we did have some of that, and same the stomach and rectum. And then we can see in the mental emotional, there was a lot of fear and anxiety, restlessness, a lot of emotionality, like that. So looking at the symptoms, most of the fevers were low-grade fevers. Nobody ever really spiked a high fever. And these symptoms also were repeated, like the same themes repeated in the proving symptoms. So those individuals who had not previous exposure or did not have previous disease proving. And some of these symptoms we also saw in those, there were many people, so there were 17 of these 63 with active had been sick for longer than 2 weeks, and some of them 3 or 4 weeks. And the symptoms were on and off, recurring, intermittent, some persistent, intermittent, recurring. So there's this, some were daily and chronic. So there's sort of this pulsation you can see in the kind of symptoms. Let's see, we also had a lot of short and mild and a little bit, a slight, as a sort of degree, slight unspecified body aches, like that. There's a little bit more description in this table. So same columns. You can see a lot coming at night. You can see the recurring and intermittent. Then in the lungs, we see the wheezing, the shortness of breath. There's also this tickling and tingling. I'm not finding it here, but here it is, tingling, scratchy, this really kind of agitated, sharp sensations coming. There was a lot of heaviness. Here's a scratchy tickling, a lot of lethargy, deep fatigue, and really the panic, fear, anxious worry, indecision. There was a fair amount of foggy-headedness, spaced out, vertigo was there, so on and so forth. So this is an interesting table to look at. This is a list of what we call the immunological symptoms. So there was the second section, which is basically the head to toe materia medica, which I'm not reviewing here. And orientation to this table. So in each category, you have the active symptoms upon registration. So that was tabulated before. After the single dose and the triple dose. So then we've got lung, active, single, triple. It keeps going like that, right? So the active symptoms, there was a total of 780 active symptoms. Then after the single dose, this lighter purple shade are symptoms that went away, that were active symptoms that went away, or new symptoms that came on and then went away, right? And then cured symptoms are ones that completely resolved. So sometimes after a single dose, if they had a fever, the fever got a little bit worse and then it went away. Sometimes after the single dose, it just completely went away. So you can see here, so the lungs, the cough in the lungs, the number of cured symptoms, the sinus symptoms, the number of cured symptoms after the single dose. But what was really interesting to us is the number that produced a fever after the triple dose. So if we go to this circle of disease, that it's, right, so there's people lumbering in a chronic state where there's sort of intermittent fever going back and forth, the discharges come and go, their lungs can't breathe, and so on and so forth. But then after a fever is stimulated, then these are resolving. So the importance of the fever and what I said, the fervor of moving through the epidemic of fever is the immune system's friend. And given antibiotics, paracetamol, Tylenol, everybody is so busy suppressing a fever, and that leads to the chronicity of all conditions. And you can see then on the third doses, you know, by then the throat symptoms had come down, the stomach, rectum. There was also a lot of vomiting and diarrhea. So this means that a discharge was activated by the remedy, right? And so we know that discharge is what Hahnemann talks about, the exonerative discharge, the sacrifice the body makes to reconcile the whole or save the whole. And so between the discharge and the fever, this is how people move towards resolution. There were 63 active, a total of 314 people who produced symptoms. So that's of the 796 that took the remedy from the single dose, and 218 who produced symptoms from the triple dose. And then these were the total number of symptoms that were new symptoms that came on. Let's see. No, these were the total. There's a little confusion here. After the triple dose or single dose, 677 came on. And the triple dose, 670 came on, and you can see that the majority of those were, so these 26, they came on and went away. So a total of whatever that is, 190, 183, something. But then you can see that the triple dose numbers reduced right here. Anyways, there's more study of that table. Questions. So let's just go through an example of what a person might have experienced. The next day after the triple dose, I woke up with a slight headache. During the day, I felt very tired. I had to rest in the afternoon. I felt chills that came and went during the day, and overall felt like I was about to catch a cold. Muscle weakness and felt like I had run a marathon the day before. The highest peak of not feeling well was at noon. Then I rested, had coffee in the afternoon, and felt better. I had a really good night's sleep and woke well. So this was a very short-lived immunological process that followed the pattern of acute disease. And I have to say that we need to understand what is true infectious disease in order to understand and make sense of the nonsense that's going on in the media. But let's see, there are some questions there. Kavita, can you read for me?
Yes, Kate. So we have Dr. Sweta Verma and Dr. Sweta Singh moderating. Please, would you like to take one or two questions, Sweta?
Yes, ma'am. There is a question.
Yes.
There is a question from Loanis Mistores. He's asking, where can we find the Novus CV?
Yes. I'm going to answer that question offline, but yes, carry on. Next question.
There are no more questions, ma'am. I think.
Okay. Okay, good. Yep. So let me carry on. I'm sorry I can't answer that one right now. So there are two papers that are being published. One is the Materia Medica of Nova CV, and I'm just introducing some, well, this is the basic, just opening description. There's, 7 pages long, so I'm not reading all this, but it is a pyretic, means that it can bring on a fever or cure fever. It's glandular. People had swollen glands. It's neuralgic. There were a lot of neuralgic pains. It's rheumatic, body aches and muscle aches. It's a purgative, vomiting and diarrhea. Exudative, so there were people who had skin symptoms. A soporific, so sleeping, and an irritant. So a lot of irritation and agitation is there. Some sensations, glass-like, scratchy, pace of the remedy, reactive, immediate, sudden. Then we have intermittent, changing, transforming, and resolving. And so what you could see that there were these chronic conditions that have been going on a long time. And after a single dose, there was immediate response. Same as the proving symptoms. All of a sudden, they came on like that. So there's a lot of velocity in the remedy. But it can address these chronic long-term issues and address intermittent or changing issues. So a lot of weakness and fatigue, lethargy, a lot of polarized symptoms. Things were either wet or dry. Exonerative discharges were there. There was a lot of blocked or runny, contraction and expansion. So we saw the head was like in a vice, and then it was open. The lungs were constricted and then open, ready to breathe. Feeling contracted, feeling constricted in life and controlled, and then the freedom once we realized that we didn't have to live in fear. Life force versus exhaustion. A lot of people felt totally enervated, charged, activated into life. Anxiety and restlessness was there versus calm and centered. Many people said that immediately they felt they could take a deep breath. They felt calm in themselves and centered. And we also have isolation and separation versus community and integration. And I want to say that the resolution to this disease is when we can move out of the isolation and separation that we are all globally experiencing, and understanding how we can live in community and be integrated as one family, as a group of humans living on this planet, integrated with nature and how the planet wants us to live. And this is really the calling of this disease. And I think the calling of each one of us as we've experienced the amount of isolation that is continuing on. So regions, the immune system, lungs, head, throat, gland, stomach, rectum, nerves. Left and right sides equally affected, alternating sides or both sides together. Some modalities, worse in the morning on waking, late afternoon, evening, night. So that's basically all time of the day. Comes with exercise. Mostly that was the breathing and fatigue. Worse motion and continued motion, looking a bit like Russ Tox, another immunological remedy, or getting wet. And I'm sure many of you have used Russ Tox as the acute GE remedy. Better from massage, initial motion, laying, and intermittent fasting. And the other thing to just add here is that these were lay people writing their symptoms down, not homeopaths writing meticulous, observant symptoms. So there may be more modalities that we didn't capture. Then this is just the conclusion, and you're going to have to watch part 3 to understand where this data came from and how we're interpreting it. So there were 96 people who had previous COVID-like symptoms between November 2019 to registration, which opened the March 13th. We did have people who had already started taking the remedy and they were included in registration. Of those, 78 said that the sickness had resolved. So that means 16 had active symptoms upon registration. Of those, of the 96, 38 people developed symptoms during. So 14 were relapsed. Those were symptoms that they had had previously that now relapsed, and then they subsequently resolved. Or they had previous COVID-like disease, and then they developed another set of symptoms which we determined which was in the symptom presentation, okay? So all 37 of those who developed symptoms resolved with the remedy, 2 did not. Those were also, these 2, I know they were my people, they had chronic underlying conditions prior to registration, prior to taking the remedy, and they were also sick. We did not follow testing in our research. Of the, was it 494 3-month responders, many of them, well, I can't remember the number, it's in the data, were tested. I think about 70 were tested totally, but and of the previous who were tested, they all tested negative. So the test was not showing whether they had disease. And we rolled this out while they were still trying to come up with a test. This was in May, in June, in July. We were getting our follow-up forms throughout the summer. The testing was, we did not have the infrastructure to give everybody the same test or the cost, or are these tests valid or reliable diagnostic tools? So this was just, tertiary information really. So the homeopathic cure rate of those with unresolved or relapsed symptoms was, with the remedy, was 97.3% of those who gave a response form to us. Right? Those who were active, 63 registrants had active symptoms, of which 16 had previous disease. Those are the same 16 here. 13.5 of previously unresolved symptoms resolved after dosing. 40 of those with active symptoms developed symptoms during, so that the remedy actually, through that immunological process, like a fever came on, or more runny nose, or more body aches came on. 46.5 of those with active symptoms resolved. 1 did not. Let's see. 60 people with active or previously unresolved symptoms resolved with the remedy, and 2 had no follow-up. Yep, 63 registrants had active symptoms. So that's 61 we had follow-up from. And I guess I can't remember this number, why it is like that, but the tables are on part 3. The homeopathic cure rate was 96% of those who gave us response forms. And then let's go to the exposed. So how we figured and tabulated the exposed were those family members that lived with somebody with previous disease or active disease. So there were 130 who lived with these 63 or 96. During the dosing, 57 developed short-lived symptoms, and it could be just as little as a single runny nose, or maybe a fever, or like a blinding headache. 56.25 developed symptoms resolved. And why we have a partial is you could say that somebody said, yeah, well, these things resolved and these didn't. So most of the people resolved. And so the question is this a latent expression? So they were exposed, but they didn't contract the disease. Somehow taking the remedy, it activated an immune response. Was that a latent expression, resolution, or was it a just proving symptoms, right? Because it wasn't a full-blown disease. And none of our people who developed symptoms ever ended up in the hospital, needed to take conventional medicine, anything like that. There was a 98.7% resolution rate. Only 8 were tested, so these were all negative. And of the 130 with definite exposure, 56 did not respond, means that they didn't produce any symptoms at all. 74 did not get the disease. Again, this is not right. It's let's see. Sorry, I don't have the one in front of me, but none of them got the disease anyways. So maybe it's of those with definite exposure, we had 74 that gave us the follow-up, 3-month follow-up form saying that they didn't get the disease. Maybe that's what that is. And then of the 343 who gave the 3 months, 0 had said they contracted the disease. So these includes people who just had proving-like symptoms or may or may not have been exposed or so on and so forth. But based on these two, because nobody got the disease who was exposed, there was 100% efficacy rate like that. Sorry, you're gonna have to look at the research. So these are the papers to be published. The Shattered Mirror is the synthesis of induced and cured symptoms. And that is to be published in the American Homeopath. That's a journal of the North American Society of Homeopaths. And we're calling it the Shattered Mirror because there is a reflection that's coming back at us that is a misinterpretation of nature. And we do believe that coronavirus is here to clarify that for us. And then the Themilia is accepting our paper, the Australian Journal of the Society of Homeopaths, the Journal of the Australian Society of Homeopaths, and that's looking at the safety effects and efficacy where all of these tables are more extensively reviewed. So here again are the video links, especially for those who joined on. It's on freeandhealthychildren.org on the right-hand side. This is the link to part 1, but 2 and 3 are there as well. And so you have an opportunity to go through. The one is 16 minutes, and these other 2 are 27 minutes each. So then I want to conclude, I'm wrapping up here, the next steps for Free and Healthy Children International and the homeopathic profession with regards to HP. One of my goals is to bring philosophical cohesion surrounding homeoprophylaxis to the profession. There's a lot of homeopaths that still have debate about HP, but clearly this research shows that there is another way, and it's just about understanding how homeoprophylaxis is working. So that is one of my goals and wishes. The research publications are to come. We have millions of legal issues, particularly in the United States. India is the only country that has, government has endorsed homeopathy. There are legal avenues for homeopathy in many countries, but it is officially recognized, but Nososdes are illegal to ship into Europe. Many countries can't have access to their remedies. There's legal issues surrounding the FDA and what we're doing with homeoprophylaxis in North America. You can even talk about providing a substitute for the CDC approved drug treatments. So one of my wishes is to put forth a development and application of healthcare systems using HP, which is really about the person who's receiving this immunization or immunomodulating agent. Economic systems, currently the vaccine paradigm is supported by every penny that you spend on a credit card, everything that we're involved in. So there's entire economic systems that need to be rearranged to allow for a very cheap, inexpensive, sustainable immunosupporting system. And then I want to offer, there's 2 options for training. We have an associate HP supervisor training coming up March 4th. And the link is right here. You're going to find it on the website. This associate supervisor training goes through more in depth of the research, more in depth of the philosophy and direct application, materia medica, and access to the Nososde. Currently, the Nososde is available to members who have been trained by us through a backdoor relationship with a pharmacy that we work with because of the legal situations that we have in North America. So please, you're welcome to join this supervisor training. Then if you wanted to become a full HP supervisor, that includes registration and listing on our website. We've got our next training is a two and a half hour trainings. It's 5 hours altogether with a number of prerequisites. That's coming up in April. And this is our website here. So I want to open it for any questions, and I guess Kathleen is going to be speaking in a few minutes. Kavita?
So much, Kate. It's a largest homeopathic proving and amazing presentation on research on CV Nososde. Dr. Sweta, would you like to take any questions on the Facebook or in the chat, please?
Yes, ma'am. In the chat, I just told one question from Loanis. And where can we find the CV? One more question is there on our Facebook Live from Mr. Nathan Roy. He's asking, where can we get this Nososde, ma'am?
Yes. So like I said, because we cannot publicize where the Nososde is right now. If they are interested to finding out, we're happy to do the associate supervisor training. And this is because there's so many questions yet. So you have the Nososde, so then you give it in practice. What do you do then? So we really want to make sure that the practitioners are well trained and understand the application. And then the pharmacy is also protected in its availability. So I can definitely not say it on this recording.
Dr. Mukta also asked the same question. Where can we get this?
Yes, yes. So the other in India, I would say, talk to Dr. Manchanda. He knows me and I can connect him. He already knows the path. So within India, there must be a way to make it available. And now we've got the research. And so my wish, or, you know, that you just follow all the paths. The infrastructure for homeopathy and homeoprophylaxis is there in India. And so we just have to go through the proper channels like that.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I
Professor
hope everyone
Regina?
enjoyed it.
Yes.
Yeah, please continue, ma'am.
So no more questions, right, Dr. Sweta?
No more questions.
And
Professor Regina, would you like to share, please? So, sorry, Kate.
Yes, please. Congratulations, Dr. Kate. It's been a wonderful webinar with so much data and proof of the success of treating of the Novid CV
CV,
nosode. I myself work in poor areas pro bono with homeopathy. I have had 5 dengues, 2 Zikas, and 1 chikungunya, which I tried and treated with Nosode. The first dengue I went with ordinary medicine, and I had a liver medication problem, severe problem. Still nowadays in the blood work, it comes out. But we are working here in Brazil, South America, Rio de Janeiro, with 60 people the past 2 months with the SARS-CoV-2 nosol.
Yes, yes.
Our protocol is 1 drop 1 week, 2 drops the following week, 3 drops the third week, on once a week until the pandemic is over.
Okay,
And
what potency is it?
And then these 60 people, none of them have got the coronavirus, nor have gone to the hospital, or are taking another parallel medication.
What potency?
None of them got the disease. Yes, please.
What potency?
It's mother tincture.
Mother tincture. Okay. I also know in Mexico they're doing prophylaxis with coronavirus nosode. I know in Cuba they did as well.
30C.
30C.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a friend who works in Cuba with 30C.
30C.
I also get my lung cancer nosode from Cuba, and it's also 30C. What I find beautiful in Cuba is that they give away for the inhabitants all the homeopathy they need and the nosodes. They don't
And
charge at all.
that is the way that the government is to act in benevolence.
Absolutely.
And medicine is free. And the system that we have, the economic system that is strangling us, is totally upside down and backwards. And so we're really grateful for you doing the pro bono work, and government systems need to be set up in a line like that. And there's a lot of work. There's 1 million jobs soon to be made to transform what we have going on this planet here.
Globally, yes. My
Yeah.
friend is treating in Cuba. He's visiting there for his psoriasis, and every 30C bottle cost him $15 because he's not living there. So they charge, and it is expensive for Brazilian standards. But it's been very successful, and all the people I know that are in Cuba or live there or have done their masters research there, they came back very impressed with the health system there and how
the
they
health system is
support the
amazing.
people.
Yes, yes.
Congratulations on your work. Very best success. And my best wishes from the heart that you can spread worldwide this serious, ethical, and empathic work of ours. Namaskarams. Thank you, Dr. Kavita.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Regina. And I myself consider as a great honor to be part of this CV research program. Lovely experience with improved health and no side effects. And even my HP clients too felt good after taking it. So very grateful to you, Kate, and entire research team of FSA for this intensive work. And I'm so glad to meet Kate at HPWWC conference held at New Delhi in India in January 2020 along with Dr. Isaac Golden, Dr. Rajman Chanda, and HPWWC founder Kathy Lemon, who organized it. So once again, thank you so much, Kate, for sharing this great information. And we would like to take privilege to honor your gracious presence and for your precious time in sharing knowledge at our study group with our caste certificate. Please kindly accept it from our team. Dr. Sweta Verma, would you like to share, please?
Sure, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Thank you. It looks lovely.
Thank you, ma'am.
For your presence. And we will honor Kathleen Shibel to our webinar. With your permission.
Yes.
Should I?